led to a lot of wrong beliefs. For example, the first one, men can't be trusted. I just didn't think they could be, because my dad and my brother were the two most unsafe people in my life and the two most important men in my life.
Men who were kind of nominally Christian, and the data shows that they're actually more abusive to their spouse, to their children, and is more involved oftentimes in sexual, sinful behavior, immorality, and all that kind of stuff. They're worse than secular men.
So I couldn't defend myself from my brother. And that was really hard. And so that also made me hate my femaleness growing up, because looking at my mom and dad, I just thought women are victims. Women get beat up.
Well, what does love even mean? I mean, to someone hearing that from a worldly perspective, they're going to think, well, hey, you're just affirming, you're an advocate for LGBT issues or whoever and whatever somebody wants. But actually, that's not biblical love, and that's not healthy love.
So, and then it was no wonder that I got involved homosexually starting in high school, because women become the only safe option in relationships.
I'm so grateful I didn't have so-called progressive Christians around me kind of pushing and guiding and cajoling and speaking, frankly, words of lies dressed up as a gospel message or something, blessing my sin bent or my pattern towards something that God was calling me out of, actually.
I just was like, I'm a gay woman. Let me just do my thing. And then God came after me. And I love that I serve a God who leaves the 99 and goes after the one, He's a good shepherd that way. God commended his love toward me in that while I was still a sinner, Christ died for the ungodly. Right. He did not say, get your act together, Christine, fix your behavior, clean yourself up, and then I'm going to go to the cross for you. He went to the cross for me in my sinful state.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. We're so glad that you're here and glad that every week you get to meet somebody new. Sometimes these are people that I don't know super well or haven't known terribly long. But in this case, Christine and I have known each other for many, many years. So Christine Sneeringer is with us. And we go all the way back to the Exodus days, Exodus International, when that was actually a healthy organization and thriving and was really making a big difference in many of our lives. So, Christine, it's great to have you with us.
It's so good to be with you, Gary. It's good to see you, actually.
Yeah, it's been a while. The last time you and I connected in person was when you came to do a conference with us. And actually, I just saw that you're actually coming up on a stand-up comedian role here pretty soon down in Florida, I think. Is that right?
Tomorrow night, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So that was 2011 when that conference that you're talking about. I know that because that was what you don't know about that. It was a desert stream. Andy Comiskey was there.
That's right.
But that was the year I was trying to do comedy. Like I had never done it before.
Yes.
I've been sharing my testimony in churches, and I know we're going to get into my story, but people would laugh at certain parts, and I didn't know it was funny, and I didn't know why it was funny, but I just thought, okay, well, they think it's funny. And I would remember that they laugh at certain bits of my story.
Yes.
So then I would use it again, because my mentor in ministry is a man that you also know, Cy Rogers, who I loved dearly. And he was super, super funny.
Yes.
And I think from just following his ministry for so long, I first heard him on Christian radio in like 1988, 89. Yeah. And I heard him speak live in 1990. And I bought the cassettes, and I used to hit rewind and play his jokes over.
Yes.
And so, but anyway, so yeah, when I was at that conference in New Hampshire, I spoke on a Sunday morning. I did a little 10-minute testimony in church before the sermon. And I was doing this leadership development course, like it was personal development, personal growth. And in that course I was trying to do stand-up comedy, and I was going to sneak in stand-up comedy on a Sunday morning. It was my first time ever trying it. And yeah, that was that event in New Hampshire in 2011.
Well, I didn't realize that was kind of your first foray into that. You were great. I actually spoke on that Sunday morning after you. And, but yeah, you were awesome. You did a great job. And there's something about, I mean, you are really talented when it comes to that. There's something about not just saying funny things, but having a kind of delivery that, and just, yeah, a certain shtick that you do have, that is a lot of fun and really humorous. So, anyway, the other thing I wanted to ask you, now that I wasn't even planning on this coming up at all, but in that, when you were doing that piece, basically, I'm assuming that this was all planned or whatever, but your mom called in. I mean, was that?
Yeah, I was in the pulpit and I could see you remember that? And my cell phone, it didn't ring. So
this wasn't planned.
No, it didn't ring. Like the audience didn't hear it.
Yeah, right.
But I answered the phone in the pulpit.
Yep.
And I put it on speaker and I was nervous because I thought, you never know what my mother's going to say.
That's hysterical.
And you guys could hear my mother and me talking. And she's like, are you busy? Go, kinda. And the whole audience is like.
Roaring. Yes. Well, that is so funny. Yeah, that's a riot.
I can't believe you remember that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, well, it was part of the, I thought, that seems so natural. And so, so it was. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Well, anyway. Now I blabbered on long enough, but to everybody who's tuned in, either watching or listening to this, we would just love, Christine, for you to be able to share some of your story with them and just let them know what God's been doing in your life.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Well, you already know I do stand-up comedy, but that came much later in life. I've been in ministry since 1999, so we met sometime after that.
Yeah.
But back up way before all that, I grew up in a typical American home. Dysfunctional. And the form of dysfunction in my family was domestic violence. And I also experienced physical, verbal, and sexual abuse. So it was a mess, a lot of trauma. I don't mean to smile as I say it. It's just, there's been a lot of healing and I'm grateful. Yeah. So, because I never would make light of that kind of stuff. It was, awful. And I don't wish it on anybody. Mm-hmm. But that's where my story started. And that led to a lot of wrong beliefs. For example, the first one, men can't be trusted. I just didn't think they could be because my dad and my brother were the two most unsafe people in my life and the two most important men in my life.
Sure, that's right.
So my dad there was domestic violence between my mother and father. And then my brother, I was the brunt of his domestic violence. He was really just following in my dad's footsteps, right. Like the way you see anger expressed is typically how we're going to express it as well. So that's what happened. He was 4 years older. So that was really hard for me because it was never a fair fight.
Right.
With the age gap and also because he was male, which I know in our country right now, we can't figure out what a woman is. And there's a lot of people who don't necessarily think that there's a difference between men and women. They think it's okay for men to play women's sports and all that kind of stuff, but there's definitely differences and men are typically bigger, stronger, more powerful. And so I couldn't defend myself from my brother. And that was really hard. And so that also made me hate my femaleness growing up because looking at my mom and dad, I just thought women are victims. Women get beat up and I didn't want to be one. So that's what started my gender confusion was the trauma in my home and especially the domestic violence. Mm-hmm. And then
it reminds me a lot of Melissa's story. The domestic violence wasn't so much there, but certainly the feeling of her mother being trapped and her dad was cheating on her and those kinds of things. And, and also having an older brother. And of course, I mean, kids get into, even in the best situations, oftentimes kids get into squabbles. And of course, him being several years older and being a boy, he was always on the winning side. So yeah, she picked up similar things, even without having maybe as severe of dysfunction or dynamic going on.
Yeah, so that's rough. So just it contributed to a lot of, it was misinformation, we use that word a lot now. But for me, it translated to wrong beliefs about me, about what it means to be a female and about men. So, and then it was no wonder that I got involved homosexually starting in high school, because what can often happen is that, for me, especially as an abuse victim, is that women become the only safe option in relationship.
Sure.
So, and also, I was trying to protect against further hurt from a man. So I ended up involved in homosexuality for a number of years, and still throughout that whole time, very broken in my gender. Like, I went by Chris. I hated my name. My name is Christine, but I didn't want to be. That's an explicitly female name.
Yep.
So I was Chris because it could be either. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like what we see today, where kids will change their name. We call it social transition. And so for me, I just shortened my name to kind of butch it up.
Yep.
And I mentioned sexual abuse, and that happened.
I remember seeing some pictures that you showed once at a conference or somewhere. And I think you were involved in a lot of sports, softball,
yes.
baseball, whatever. But you were showing some images where you looked very, very much like a boy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Butch. Yeah.
Yep.
I used to joke that I was a runner-up in the Miss Butch America pageant, but then people were like, oh, really? They wanted to know more about the pageant. I made that up,
Right. That's not a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a thing. So, anyway, so yeah, it wasn't until as a young adult, and I wasn't looking for God. I had some exposure to God growing up, because my dad claimed faith at some point, but he was still abusive to my mom. So that was very confusing.
Yeah.
And it kind of turned me off to God. If God is okay with you hitting your wife, then I'm not okay with God.
Yeah.
It's no wonder we have such distorted concepts of God, is because of how people represent him or misrepresent him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it reminds me, I don't want you to pick up your story, but it reminds me of Nancy Pearcey's latest book.
Love That Body.
The Toxic. Well, that's amazing. But her most recent one is The Toxic War on Masculinity. Okay. But in it, she really unpacks the data which I've never really heard or seen before. But we always hear about the toxic masculinity, basically, and anything that's kind of smacks of masculinity as sort of toxic, that's oftentimes the perceived view in culture or whatever. But she really separates out the good Christian and authentic Christian man from the nominal Christian man. And what you're describing, and what I experienced a lot around me too, were people that were men who were kind of nominally Christian, and the data shows that they're actually more abusive to their spouse, to their children, and is more involved oftentimes in sexual, sinful behavior, immorality, and all that kind of stuff. They're worse than secular men. But when you separate out and pull out of those the committed Christian man, they are worlds apart. And right. So it's important to look at the differences between the nominal Christian man and the truly authentic Christian man.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. No, I wasn't familiar with that book or that research, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So my dad was the nominal Christian man, claiming it claiming the name as a Christian, but his actions weren't lining up in the home at all. He was addicted to pornography and alcohol. He was abusing my mother. So that was really challenging, and certainly skewed everything for me towards men, how I felt about men.
Yeah. Yeah. So, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So
when did you actually come into genuine faith? What kind of led into that, do you think?
Well, it was, it's the funniest way, because I wasn't looking for him. I had given up on God because I had two failed attempts. One is when I was a child, because, like I said, because of my father's example, I was just kind of turned off. And then again, as a young adult, with a group that I met when I was in junior college, but it turned out to be very extreme, like the Sheppard movement.
Oh, yeah.
Far. And so it was very controlling, and it was considered a cult. And I had friends who were involved in it. It was a very small group, but like it broke up when their parents got involved in trying to get their kids out. And so they literally had kidnapped two girls were kidnapped, not like from the house. We all lived in a home together, which it always sounds so weird. I get embarrassed when I talk about it, just because, like, what was I thinking? But at the same time, the people who are attracted to groups like this are people who want to make a difference in the world and who are very idealistic. I learned this after the fact. So I got involved in a group that was way too controlling, but it was also a Christian group, but it was just, it was Christianity gone, I don't know, like, it's not the Christianity that I know today, or even the God that I know today. So when I got out of that, I was like, I'm so done, because I just was like, I'm a gay woman. Let me just do my thing. And then God came after me. And I love that I serve a God who leaves the 99 and goes after the one, He's a good shepherd that way. And he wants, he sees one shepherd out there, and he went after me, and he found me on a church softball team, which never made sense, because why was I playing softball with Baptists? But I had a friend on the team, and I love sports. So that was the only reason I was playing ball with them. And I didn't realize the whole thing was a setup. It was God's way to get me around Christians on a regular basis. And just like what we talked about, the difference between authentic Christianity and nominal Christianity, because these were authentic Christians, and there was something very compelling about them.
Yeah.
And our team was run like a home fellowship. So in that we prayed before the game, which always frustrated me because we never prayed to win. That was the only prayer request I would have had, is, can we please pray to win? But then after the game, we met, and the coach would say, does anybody have prayer requests? And we'd have this time of like sharing, like you would at a home fellowship group. Yeah. And people would share personal needs, and then there would be a little prayer. And I never had a prayer request then. I just was like, I just waited for that to be over. But over time, watching this happen, and then the next week when we come back to play, people would check in with each other, and they'd say, oh, I've been praying for you about that thing you shared about, it's either a medical situation or a job that you're trying to get or whatever. They would check in like we do in the faith. We say, hey, I'm praying for you, Gary. How's it going with that? You asked for prayer for your son or whatever. And I noticed that. And that was different. I hadn't experienced that before. And that is what I think, just the way they lived and the way they loved. And there is an old song, and you probably remember it. And it's goes, they'll know we are Christians by our love.
Yep.
That is supposed to be our testimony.
Yes.
They're supposed to go, wow, who are these people that are so loving? Oh, they must be Christian.
Yes.
We're not known for that.
Right.
Sadly.
Yeah, we're kind of known for, most research shows that the opinion of kind of non-Christians toward the church are Christians are against everything, basically, and we need to do it. And that's not exactly true by a long shot, but in some cases it is quite true. And it's easy to understand why people would feel that way, because we don't emphasize enough what we're actually for. And it's also, we've also allowed language to really change and shift around us, so that things like the word love, like when you, even that saying that, hey, the song and the scripture that's based in, they'll know that you're Christians, or you're my disciples by the way you love one another. Well, what does love even mean? To someone hearing that from a worldly perspective, they're going to think, well, hey, you're just affirming, you're an advocate for LGBT issues or whoever and whatever somebody wants. But actually, that's not biblical love, and that's not healthy love in a lot of ways. Because I look back on my life, and I think anybody listening or viewing this can look back on seasons of their life, and I know you would agree with this too, when the thing that I so deeply wanted, and the thing I wanted to be so profoundly affirmed in, was some of the worst stuff that I could have ever gotten involved in. And I'm grateful looking back now that there were, most people around me didn't affirm that. I'm so grateful I didn't have so-called progressive Christians around me kind of pushing and guiding and cajoling and speaking, frankly, words of lies dressed up as a gospel message or something, blessing my sin bent or my pattern towards something that God was calling me out of, actually. So what are your thoughts about, I want you to share, again, unpack more of your story, but you really made a great distinction, as we were doing earlier, between the nominal and the authentic, and you got to experience being like, this is different. This is different than the live-in situation that was so controlling and really broken and cultish, and it's also radically different from my dad's, kind of faith and all that. So, what was that? How did that impact you? Even if you could unpack that a little bit more.
Well, it impacted me in the sense those were very confusing messages about the character of God and the nature of God. And it wasn't a God I wanted to get to know.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I met people who were living their faith in front of me, and they loved me, and they didn't really, I don't know how lovable I was, because I think I was embarrassing them, and only say that because I was the hyper competitive, I was there to play ball. They didn't really care if they won or not. That's why they never prayed to win.
Right.
It was like, whatever. They were like, if we win, glory to God. If we lose, glory to God. I was like, no.
Wait, hold up.
Yeah. And then I didn't know they were complaining about me, but I was the one in the outfield throwing my glove and swearing when the ball got past the shortstop. Meanwhile, my jersey said, say yes to Jesus. And so they were horrified because they knew that the other teams would be like, what's happening right now? Like, what? Something's not working, between this person in right field and this whole team that their shirt says something about Jesus. That didn't make sense. I didn't know. And God bless them that they let me stay. They said to the coach, she's cussing in the outfield. He said, you pray, you see that girl, you pray for that girl. And he could have said, look, you need to shape up or ship out.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? And that's what we do too much, is that's the message sometimes the world gets from us, is you got to be like us and then we'll accept you. But you know what? There's a scripture that I love in Romans chapter 5, verse 8. God commended his love toward me in that while I was still a sinner, Christ died for the ungodly. He did not say, get your act together, Christine, fix your behavior, clean yourself up, and then I'm going to go to the cross for you. He went to the cross for me in my sinful state.
Yeah.
And he permissions us to love people who aren't like us and who may be living outside of God's boundaries. And that's not just the sexual sinner. That's lots of different people, that are living in ways that don't please God. We can love them and engage them and interact with them and be like Jesus with skin on.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example, again, of the authentic Christian. And honestly, what I found is I really do believe that some of the people who are so quick to grab stones to throw because someone's behavior is so obnoxious or so sinful or so this or that, they have the image of the good Christian, but inwardly they are full of crap. Their private life is very broken and is very contrary to what they're proclaiming on the outside. And oftentimes those are some of the first people to grab stones to throw at somebody who is, obviously, saying or doing things that would be sinful. I think it's the authentic Christian that does have that response of, man, we need to really pray for her. And yeah, this is tough. I mean, I was a mess. I was hard to be around for other guys. When I was coming fresh out of adult bookstores and gay bars and all the craziness that I was involved in, coming into the church, into my first men's group where I didn't want to be. But that was a tough, hard season for me, but it was also difficult for them. And yet God put me in this authentic group, and they loved me and walked with me, put their arm around me, would even touch me, would hug me on Sundays or hug me, and just drew me in, and God used these guys to transform my life through that. So
yeah, it's very healing. And that's what I experienced. Not just, So the softball team was really my introduction to Christian culture. And then that's what I was noticing is the difference when these people and the people at my university, where I was noticing that, I had friends at school, but they were fair weather friends. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
They're just there when things are great. But these people were praying for each other and standing in the gap and checking in and wanting to support each other in the hard times of life, in the valleys. And that was compelling to me. And
for sure.
It was that example that I said, I want to be like those people. I want those kind of people in my life. And I thought, how do you get like that? And I said, I don't really know. And then I just started suddenly, I went to church occasionally to all of a sudden I went Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Sunday school, and home fellowship. I went to everything I could go to just to understand and get immersed in their culture to learn. And then I started building relationships. And you were just describing your same-sex relationships and the healing power of that. And I was experiencing that also in my female relationships, because at that point I started my journey away from homosexuality, because I realized, okay, well, the Bible clearly condemns homosexual behavior in the Old and the New Testament. And so I knew this was out of bounds, and I wanted God more than my homosexuality.
Yep. Right.
So I sought help
Surrendered.
I started attending a support group, and I even had a counselor, and I was going to church and learning about God, deepening my faith. My roots were going down into Christianity, but it was transforming my relationships. And as I developed healthy same-sex friendships where there wasn't romance or anything sexual, it was just intimacy, emotional intimacy, and friendship and support and encouragement and affirmation, all the things we really need. We need connection. Because it wasn't an option for me to say, well, I have this proclivity and I have these attractions, so let me stay away from women. That was not an option for me, even though that they were a temptation for me. Just like, it's different though. Like, for example, for the alcoholic can say, look, I'm not going to drink anymore. But the food addict can't say, I'm going to quit food. So I had to be like the food addict and learn how to develop a healthy relationship with food.
Yep.
And I had to learn how to develop healthy relationships with women where I wasn't over attaching. Because first of all, I always went to emotional dependency where I would over attach on them and try to get all my emotional needs for security from this one person in my life, this special friend, the girlfriend. And although I have to be careful how I use that word now, because straight women will call each other girlfriends. And that's how they talk. And so, it was a different kind of girlfriend back then. But, and as I developed healthy same-sex friendships and intimacy, emotional intimacy in my relationships with women, my sexual attractions for women naturally diminished. And I believe that's because I got what I was looking for all along: love, intimacy, and connection.
Yes.
So prior to that, I was basically taking a legitimate need and trying to meet it in an illegitimate way outside of God's boundaries. And now I was like lining up with who God says I am, and I want to live for you. And so this means that these kind of relationships off limits. So how do I navigate these relationships and get what I need and be a friend too? It's not even about just getting, it's a mutual thing,
That's right.
Where I can be, if you want to have a friend, you got to be a friend.
Right.
And
That's
that transformed my female relationships.
Yeah, I mean, your journey is there's a lot of parallels to mine as well, and but also the thing that strikes me is that your journey was just that. It was a journey, and it was the idea, the nonsense about pray the gay away or whatever, that pejorative term. That of course prayer is a big part of our journey, no doubt, but you and I don't know. I'm assuming you know a handful of people. I know several that where the Lord showed up and did a miraculous reorientation, in their life. And of course, that's frankly, isn't that what we all wanted? I was so mad when I'd meet these people, and I'm like, "You got what? I mean, God, where were you?" But I'm so grateful now, looking back and having had the long journey of falling on my face and getting back up, and and learning to this discipleship process that all of us are called into. But it's been this long journey of growing and becoming more sanctified, more like Jesus over time. And there's a long way yet to go. But man, I'm so glad that I'm not back where I was, 20 years ago, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, I remember Cy Rogers would talk about that. Like, we all want this zap, be zapped into wholeness. But he talks about God gets more glory in the process.
Yeah, it's true.
And so for me, also a big part of that journey was not only developing healthy same-sex friendships, but embracing who God made me to be, which was my femaleness, because I was rejecting that for the first 20 years of my life. And so then I kind of came to a place of like, because I always thought that God made a mistake when he made me female. Basically that I don't know what the birth rate was when I was born, but basically God's super busy, like on a conveyor belt making people, and he's rushing to make people. And then I come along and he's not paying attention, and I accidentally became a girl. That's what I thought. I thought it was like, I Love Lucy, where she's packing the chocolates.
Yes, the chocolates.
And they're coming too fast. And so Lucy starts eating them, stuffing them in her shirt everywhere, because she can't keep up with, she can't pack fast enough. And I'm thinking God can't make people fast enough for the birth rate. And then so it's a cross between I Love Lucy and Mr. Potato Head. So he's just grabbing, he's got body parts, he's grabbing stuff and he's putting them on things. And then here I was, and I ended up a girl. I should have been a boy. And I was really challenged by the scripture in Psalm 139. It says that he knit me together in my mother's womb. Like, I will be the first to admit I don't knit, I don't sew, I don't do any of those things. But if, more power to the people who do that, great. But the thing I do know about knitting is it's deliberate.
Yes.
A pot holder, a sweater, a scarf doesn't just appear. Somebody had to plan that thing out. So knitting is intentional. That meant that my biological sex was by God's design. And I struggled because I always thought it was an oversight. I thought it was a genetic roll of the dice, and it was a mistake. And I thought I knew better. And there's a lot of people today who think they know better. And I was one of those. And I said, okay, well, if you are the God I'm serving, then you're bigger than me. Listen, I don't want a God that's not bigger than me. I don't want to serve a God that I can explain away. That I want somebody that's more wise, more powerful, all of those things. And that's the God I serve, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who's good, who's just, who's kind, all these things. And so I said, well, then I guess this was your plan. I thought it was a mistake. I'm just going to lean in and go with it. And that was a process. You don't just say, you don't go from hating your body for that long, for a couple decades to like, okay, I'm so glad I'm a woman now. It was a journey to like figure this out and to like, I was terrified of straight women, which is so funny now, but not because I thought they would hurt me, but I just didn't understand them. And I didn't relate to them. Like, I thought, I don't know anything about makeup and all the things they like, fashion or whatever. I have a younger sister and she is foo-foo. Like, she's full on all those things. And we're total opposite. I was out playing with the kids in the neighborhood, the boys. I was the only girl on my little league baseball team. We didn't have softball. So I played on a baseball team with other boys. And, my goal was to be as tough as any of them could be. I played flag football, not even flag. We played tackle. What am I saying? Tackle football. And I was always first round draft pick. I want Chris, and I was proud of that. And I know that I have a lot of guy friends who were the opposite, where they were their last ones picked, because of our brokenness and our gender and how we didn't fit in with our peer group. And even the messaging that we got, because just because I like sports doesn't make me less than in my femininity or femaleness. I know that now, but at the time I thought I was somehow inferior and inadequate as a female. And now I know I've got the body parts, so I'm good. Like, I don't care if I'm driving a truck, digging a ditch, or putting on makeup. I am just as female in any of those.
Yep, that's true. That's absolutely true. And that's a great segue, actually, Christine, into, well, a couple things. One is you actually went to Oxford. I mean, that's pretty stinking cool, and graduated, right? That's amazing. Talk a little bit about that. But then I also want to spend a good chunk of our time talking about this book that you've written that is so important, that really gets into gender madness, honestly. So let's do this segue, though. How did you even think of going to Oxford?
Basically, when we hit 2014, when they legalized same-sex marriage at the Supreme Court level, it shifted everything to where it was just normalized. I don't know if I'm sure you noticed this too.
Oh, I was at an RHN conference when it actually happened, and a reporter came and talked to us and all. Yeah. So it's one of those moments, like, I know exactly where I was when the news came down.
Well, and I didn't notice it on the day, but like when I would be traveling after that and you're sitting next to somebody, you're having a conversation, they would be very free to say, a woman would say, well, my wife, such and such. Sure. And a man would say, my husband, this and that. And before that, people weren't that forthright.
Right.
And it just made it mainstream and normal. And prior to that, I'd already been in ministry for about 14 or 15 years. And it seemed like my story and my testimony was kind of like my most compelling apologetic on this issue, in terms of talking about God's perspective on sexuality and biblical sexuality and things like that. Because there was for a while, there was a belief, you're born this way, you can't change. I mean, I guess some people still believe it, but then now there's a whole new group that came along later that was said sexuality is fluid. So anything goes, and there's not a real surprise if people say they want to change their sexuality. But for a while, it was you're stuck in whatever, and I through the journey that we just described of embracing God's design for my body, embracing God's design for my sexuality, and just learning so much about men and women and what God had for me, I realized, and the healing that took place. So it's not even just, I changed my mind. There was real healing that took place. So I don't struggle homosexually anymore. Like it's not a challenge for me. It doesn't mean I can't ever be tempted. So I want to be really clear on that.
Sure.
But it's not something I'm fighting against. There's been a real shift. Anyway, when we legalized same-sex marriage at the national level, it felt like it was suddenly, I don't know, it was just mainstream and normalized. And I was trying to figure out, how do we talk about this anymore? Because it felt like it was no longer a compelling apologetic to have had experience in that and to come through that onto the other side of saying, there's freedom beyond this and nobody has to be this way. I mean, I know there's people who still want to be, but I'm saying there's people who don't want to embrace their same-sex feelings and attractions. They don't want to live that way. And for many, their faith could be a factor, and not even just Christian faith. You got Jewish faith, Mormons. There's a number of faiths that say this is really out of bounds according to our deity, and certainly to my God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So anyway, I heard about a guy, a friend of mine, played a sermon for me on YouTube one night, and I wasn't really thinking much about it, but I was really captivated by this speaker, and I didn't know that he worked for Ravi Zacharias' ministry. I just was like, wow, this guy's amazing. And so then I started YouTube stalking the guy, listening to everything I could find. And then I ended up going to his website eventually, and that's how I found out he worked for RZIM, Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, and he was an apologist or an evangelist. But what I noticed was that he had a week-long summer school in Oxford. And I was like, I want to go to that. Immediately, I was praying, Lord, I would like to go to this. I'd like to learn from this guy because I think he's amazing at what he does. I called him the Cy Rogers of apologetics. Okay.
Okay. That's saying something.
Well, because Cy Rogers was an amazing communicator.
Yes.
My hero of the faith. And I say was because he passed away in 2020 of cancer. God rest his soul. But he was amazing and a dear friend and just one of the best communicators, not just on sexuality, just across the board. And this guy reminded me of him. His name was Michael Ramsden. And he was for me, the package on communication was somebody who's smart, okay, but also anecdotal and funny. They tell stories and also has some humor in there because these topics are pretty heavy. You talk about sexuality, sexual brokenness, sexual abuse, all kinds of things, porn addiction, whatever. That's heavy stuff. But if you can throw some humor in there, it just lets some of the pressure off. And so a guy like Cy Rogers, I could listen to for hours, and same as with Michael Ramsden. So I started praying about going to his week-long summer school, even though I want to say this, Gary, it was sold out and I couldn't afford it anyway, but I still believed I could get into a sold out summer school that I couldn't afford. Because I was like, I just want to do what I do better. I want more tools in my toolbox. And then I noticed that he was going to be speaking in Florida at the church that evangelized me, the church where I played on a softball team back in the 88, 89, 90, that church, which I'm still very connected to. And they even supported me in ministry for many years. So I went to my pastor and I said, hey, listen, I have something I want to ask. Is it possible? I would like to meet Michael Ramsden when he comes to speak. And Ravi Zacharias was speaking on the same day. Both gentlemen were going to be there. I was asking to meet Michael because that was the person that captivated me as a communicator. Ravi was wonderfully intellectual and brilliant, but I couldn't listen to him for hours. He was just too dense. It's like trying to read C.S. Lewis. You have to read the same page over and over, to get it. So with Michael Ramsden, I just really clicked with him as a communicator. So I got to meet him in February of 2016. And I said, I really would like to go to your summer school. And he said, I would much rather you come to our year-long training. And I was like, the back of my head blew off. I didn't know, like, how is that possible? I can't even, well, first of all, I thought, I knew how much a week cost for the summer school, and I knew I couldn't afford that. So is it that number times 52? Because that is a lot of money. So I was thinking, how is that going to work? But then my second thought was, I bet you can learn a lot more in a year than a week. And then my third thought was like, well, if God opened the door, I'll walk through it. But not ever thinking that, I mean, I just was like, I don't know. And so it was a process, again, of just trusting and stepping out. And that program included studying at Oxford University. We would study theology at Oxford University, and RZIM taught apologetics and evangelism. And this was an annual course they did. This was probably in their 13th year by this point. So my cohort had 24 students from 6 continents. They came from all over the world. And most of them were in their 20s. I was on the older end because I was in my late 40s. But 3 people from my class, including myself, stayed on and continued studying theology. And so I did get a degree from Oxford University. You brought up my book, and I have to say, as I was writing this book it's called Answers to Gender Madness. It's a Q&A book. As I was writing it, I remember at one point thinking, Lord, I just want to say I really appreciate that you let me go to Oxford and get a degree before you put me out there on this issue of gender. Yes. Because when people want to say, what does she know? She's a moron. She's an idiot. Because I'm not telling the woke narrative about men and women and that there's no difference and all this kind of stuff. And that, sure, it's fine. And you can be whatever gender you want to be. I'm not for any of that. I'm certainly not for children transitioning. But so when people want to discredit me for my beliefs, for adhering to what I believe is God's perspective on gender and the creation narrative, and they want to say that I'm dumb or whatever, at least they have to reckon with the fact that, well, yeah, maybe you think I'm dumb, but I went to Oxford, I did get a degree. Yeah. I mean, I also have a master's in counseling too. So I already had that, but yeah. And so I didn't plan that. Gary, you know how you're a parent. So some parents have what they call an oops baby, and that was my oops degree.
I was the oops baby. Yes. I was the oops baby. Yep.
Yeah.
Which answers a lot of questions as to what went wrong to begin with, but yes.
So I was trying to go for a week, and I overshot it by 4 years.
That's awesome.
But only God can do that. And I just want to say there's a scripture in Ephesians, I believe it's 3:20, that says God is able to do immeasurably, depending on the translation, more than we can ask,
abundantly,
think, or imagine.
above and beyond. Yes.
And I always thought, give me a break, because I got a great imagination. I kind of thought, I don't know. I mean, yes, he's big, he's powerful, but seriously, he definitely rocked even my imagination on that one, because I never imagined I would go to such a prestigious university and get a degree. And I also call it my midlife crisis degree. And most people just get a sports car, and that's actually cheaper and faster, faster to get, as well as it drives faster. But, that was the journey I ended up on. I never expected it. Some people thought that it was my bucket list. I was like, that was never in my wildest dreams.
Thank you for joining us for this week's podcast. Please join us next week for part 2 of this interview.